thank you, everybody. Thanks to everyone for coming. I appreciate that you made the trip from wherever you are, wherever base camp is for your weekend fishing operation. I'm glad you could join us today. Enjoy a nice meal, and hope you learned something from what we're going to talk about today. Now, what I'm going to spend most of my time talking about is how we use some relatively advanced sonar technology from Humminbird. This would be Humminbird Side Imaging, or something that's relatively new, which is called 360 imaging, to better understand the fall bite that we're all up here to take advantage of. Now, the only promise that I'll make to you about the seminar tonight is that at the very end, I'm going to tell you exactly how we've been catching fish over the last 2 days up here. Okay, now the reports from around the lake are, I would say, mixed. Some people are spending a lot of time out fishing and catching 1 or 2 fish for a 4 or 5, 6 hour investment. Some people are catching a few more. Some people are catching maybe around a dozen fish. And I'll tell you that over the last couple of days, we've been up in that about a dozen fish per night category. They're all beautiful. And one of the things you'll notice if you haven't gone fishing already is that the fish in the lake this year are big. Not just long, we're all used to them being long in the fall, but they have great big bellies on them. They're eating really well. There's lots of chow up shallow. We'll talk about how we use some of these sonar technologies to better visualize and understand that shallow structure and help us target specific parts of that shallow structure to catch more of these fish that we've all made the trip up to try to catch. So, really, the two questions that we should have as we start to think about tonight's discussion are this. How can side imaging and 360 imaging help me catch fish during the day as well as night? Because even though many of us come up here up to Mille Lacs in the fall to experience the night trolling bite, there are a lot of daytime bite opportunities as well. We can use these same technologies from Humminbird Side Imaging and 360 imaging to help us catch fish not only during the night, when everybody's out buzzing around with crankbaits and stuff like that, but also during the day. And whether it's walleyes, and my group and I have been out crappie fishing for the last 2 days, and have just had a wonderful time out catching crappies during the day. So the things that we'll talk about today are not only applicable to the night bite, but they're equally applicable to how you would pursue fish out here and in nearby lakes during the day as well. So, how many people in the room have a side imaging fishing system? Raise your hands. How many people would like to have it? So, because not a lot of us have experience interpreting what a side image is relative to the traditional sonar image that that we've all grown up looking at, recognizing that traditional sonar image that we've all gotten used to looking at is only showing us a tiny little portion of the bottom that is right beneath the transducer. I'm going to spend a little time as we get started here to talk about exactly what a side image looks like and how to interpret that side image in the context of the underwater world around us. So this is sort of a traditional side image. I collected this up on the north end, up in Garrison Bay. It's of the weed line that's up there on the north end. And the way we have to understand how the side image is laid out is as this. Up here on the top is a little blue icon. That's the boat. Okay, the side imaging transducer is mounted on the back of the boat, and it directs, instead of a cone-shaped sonar beam straight down, instead it directs a paper-thin sonar beam out to the sides of the boat. Okay, and as information is collected by that transducer, it is displayed in kind of a historical or waterfall perspective like this. So that the newest information that the transducer collects is at the top of the screen, and as we drive our boat along, the information that we collect proceeds down towards the bottom. So the newest information is up here at the top, the oldest information is down here at the bottom. So if you think about how that relates to your traditional sonar screen, when you look at that color LCD and you're looking for the fish arches, well there the newest information is all the way over on the right, and as things get older it progresses over to the left. Here we're thinking from top to the bottom from a historical perspective. Now in a side image we have information that's directly underneath the boat. Okay, this would be the center area. This is an image of the water column immediately beneath the boat. But there's also information that spreads out to both sides. And in this particular case we're looking at a 100-foot distance from the boat's path all the way over to the right or to the left. And we can change that distance depending upon how far left and right we'd like to be able to look. So we're looking at a 200-foot wide swath of water. Not just what's underneath the boat, but 2/3 of a football field wide as we drive down, as we drive along this weekend. Now I've started off in relatively shallow water. We know that it's shallow because the thickness of this dark stripe is relatively narrow. And as I've driven along, I've gone towards water that's a little bit deeper. The thickness of that dark stripe has gotten larger. So I've gone from shallow to deep. I've actually started inside the weeds. This oldest area here, this oldest information is inside the weed bed. This stripe of what I think about as being little cauliflower pods is the weeds. So this is a mixture of cabbage and coontail up there on the north end. And I've driven over the weed bed, and I've gone outside the outside edge of the weeds, where many of us focus our fishing activity here in the fall, along this outside edge. So the side image allows us to look at a large piece of water. A side image is always historical information. It's what I've just driven over and what's behind me. Okay, now in contrast, if we look at the next slide, we have what's called a 360 image. 360 imaging is a relatively new technology from Humminbird that uses a transducer that is deployed beneath the boat. So it's on a movable pole that slides up and down to this housing. And when that transducer is lowered down into the water, it's lowered down beneath the lower unit like we have in the cartoon over there. Now inside of that housing is a transducer that rotates around. So instead of just looking beneath the boat, which is the traditional sonar that nearly everybody has in their boat, instead of looking just out to the sides and behind the boat, which is what side imaging does, 360 imaging allows us to look all around the boat, including what's in front of us. So think about how you might use this in your fishing applications, right? If you're trying to figure out where that rock pile is so you don't drive over it. 360 imaging will show you exactly where that rock pile is so you don't hit it. I'm going to show you some applications of how I use 360 imaging for trolling as well to help you anticipate changes in weed beds. So you're not trying to guess, I know this weed bed bumps out here and I'm trying to figure out exactly when I should make my turn. 360 imaging will allow you to see the bump out in that weed bed so you can anticipate it perfectly so your baits swing right along that outside edge and not get buried in that thick weed before they get petered out. Now, you can see here I've got my boat icon in the middle. I have a transducer that's rotating all the way around, and the information that is displayed in 360 imaging is very much like a radar scope. Okay, now you'll see this white line that runs through the middle of the 360 image, and as the information is collected, that white line sweeps around in a clockwise fashion. You can see we have this white arrow here. The white line is constantly sweeping around. Now the newest information that is always displayed in 360 imaging is right behind the white line. The oldest information is right in front of it. So this information is constantly refreshing as the white line proceeds around and around. Now this is a 360 image that's from a 100-foot wide radius circle. So this is 200 feet wide, 200 feet from side to side, all around my boat. I'm imaging everything that's in the water and on the bottom in that 200-foot wide circle. Now, around the periphery, you can see we have the same sort of cauliflower-looking stuff that we looked at before in those weeds in the north end. Okay, this is a weed bed, and behind the boat, immediately behind the boat, we've got something else that is not weeds. I don't know if we can all make that out. Anybody have a guess at what this might be? Rocks? No, it's not rocks. Talk about why it's not rocks in a little while. That is a bluegill spawning colony. Those are the little depressions that bluegills furrow out in the sand as they're getting ready to spawn. And so when I take my kids out bluegill fishing in the spring or crappie fishing, because they make colonies that are similar to this except the beds are farther apart, we don't guess about where the fish are. Gee, that shoreline looks good over there. Let's go fish over there for a little while and see if we catch anything. Instead, we drive around until we see this, because that's where the fish are. So we can put ourselves immediately on the fish by imaging them, the fish sometimes themselves, as well as the little beds that they're generating, using either side imaging, or in this case, 360 imaging. So let's talk a little bit about how to interpret these images that we collect either from side imaging or 360 imaging. And the basic fundamentals are this, that if we have something that's really hard in the water column, hard objects appear bright. Okay, now these two things happen to be bridge pilings down on the Mississippi River. So they're made out of concrete. They're very, very hard. Okay? This is how I knew that those things that we were looking at before were not rocks, but instead depressions, because if they were little rocks, a little cluster of gravel, they'd be bright white instead of dark. Okay? So hard things appear bright. If we have large objects like these fish cribs from the reservoir that's near my home in Wisconsin, large objects cast shadows. Imagine the sonar beam, this paper-thin sonar beam that's being produced by the transducer, traveling out to the side and hitting something tall. Well, that beam gets reflected back to the transducer to form a picture like this. It can't penetrate that tall object, and so that tall object casts a sonar shadow, just like a tree would cast a shadow on the ground from the sun, right? The tree blocks the sunlight. The tree prevents the sunlight from hitting the ground and makes a shadow. So if we have tall objects, or as we'll see later, things that are high off the bottom, like fish, they'll produce shadows like these fish cribs do. We can see a shadow over here as well from this tree that has fallen down in the water. Here's the length of the tree. We can see the trunk, we can see the branches, and over here we have a darker image of that tree. That's the sonar shadow that is generated by that tree, where sonar energy can't penetrate beyond the tree and image the bottom around it. Some other basics. One of the things that I think is a wonderful application of side imaging out here on the lake, as well as for ice fishermen, where we're trying to find exactly where the hard bottom, the sand, butts up against the muck, because we want to go perch fishing there in a little while, is that both side imaging and 360 imaging make it very easy to identify hard bottom, soft bottom transitions. Hard bottom always appears bright. Here we have some sand with some embedded rock. This is up just outside of the red door, actually. And then as we go to soft bottom, the bottom gets much darker blue. Here we have some little piles of rubble and bedrock that are sticking out of the soft bottom. This hard-soft transition is very obvious, right? Going right through the diagonal of the image here. Hard bottom over here, sand and gravel. Soft bottom over here, muck. Okay? The difference in color is associated with how much sonar energy the different sorts of bottoms reflect back to the transducer. Hard bottom will take that sonar energy that comes in and reflect much of it back to the transducer. That's why that image is real bright. Soft bottom will absorb that energy, so not much of the sonar energy actually makes it back to the transducer. That's why we get the dark color that's associated with the soft bottom areas. Now, side imaging and 360 imaging are not just about structure, not just about what's on the bottom. They're also fantastically powerful tools for identifying fish. And not just the fish that are right beneath us, like we were kind of gotten used to seeing those hooks in our traditional sonar, but instead fish that are all around us. Okay, these are fish. This is a large school of fish that I imaged in a scour hole beneath Lock and Dam number 3 down by Redwood. Okay, so here's the bottom, the white stripes. The fish themselves are the little white streaks that we see pretty easily here in the middle of the image. And maybe later I'll leave my computer up, you can come and see them actually in the image themselves and not have to worry about projecting them up against the wall up here. So these white streaks are fish that are up above the bottom. Now the reason I know that these are suspended fish is because these fish that are high off the bottom are casting shadows. See these dark images over here? These are the dark spots. These are the sonar shadows that are associated with these fish. Anytime we see a white streak separated by a large distance from a black spot, we know that's a fish that's suspended above the bottom. Now in contrast, over here are fish that are strongly related to the bottom, sitting right in the bottom itself. Okay, maybe if you concentrate closely enough, you can see a series of horizontal little stripes here in that image. This is the washboard sand bottom that's found in a river. And so if we've all read our Al Lindner books about where fish are going to be in the river, we know that quite often on these sand flats that have washboard bottoms, fish will tuck in right in that low spot, allowing the current to go over top of it, right? Well, you'll notice that in each of these stripes, these horizontal stripes, those are the low spots. Each of them has a pile of little bright white returns. Those are the fish that are sitting right there, belly to the bottom, in that sand, that relatively soft sand bottom of a river. So side imaging is good not only for seeing suspended fish that are high up off the bottom, but as well as belly to the bottom fish. We have to remember that our favorite fish that's swimming around there in the lake, quite often, is a belly to the bottom fish. It's at certain times of the year. Okay, so we can see those fish without any trouble.